Welcome to the Isabella Sunshine Channel. Today, we're going to be diving into the world of what it means to be a paramedic. We're going to be looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly. You might be asking yourself at this point in your life, should I look into being a paramedic? Do I want to pursue this career? I hope that today, our interview with a paramedic, Andrew, who's been working for 8.5 years in Eastern Ontario in Canada, may help you answer that question. Today's interview will be shedding some light about what it looks like to be a paramedic in Canada today. Know that paramedic careers can be different in any given country. So while Andrew and what he shares with us today is representative, the opinions that he shares today are representative of his own experience and insight. Of course, those would be different for any other person or paramedic working within that healthcare industry. So of course, before you go and pursue a career in this field or any other, make sure that you do some research of your own. Welcome to Career Talks, where we dive deep into different career options. I interview people from all walks of life who have chosen a variety of careers. I ask the easy questions, but I also don't shy away from the hard questions. I want to give you an honest outlook about whether these career choices will be right for you. So sit back, grab a beverage, and listen in to Career Talks. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Andrew, a paramedic from Canada. All right, Andrew, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Today, we're going to dive into some questions with Andrew, who works as a paramedic in Eastern Canada. So without further ado, we're going to dive right in. So Andrew, when I think of a paramedic or when I think of you working on your job, I think what I picture in my head is that you're being called out. It's pretty high adrenaline. You're called out to some difficult scenes. You're possibly facing some difficult scenarios when you get there, but also maybe some mundane ones sometimes. Go, 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 sirens going. However, then you're transferring to, doctor's care, medical care, and then maybe there's slower times or dull times or times of uncertainty when then the patient is transferred and you never hear from them again, or maybe there's maybe there's slow times like firefighters have too sometimes. So I guess for me, I think of maybe fast pace, slow pace, uncertainty, but a high adrenaline job. Would you say that is even remotely accurate for a paramedic? What does a typical day look like? What does it look like to be a primary care paramedic in Canada?
That's a lot of questions in one. So I'll give you a quote that one of my professors back in school gave me, which was really interesting, not just me, to the class. And he said, this job is 99% boredom, 1% terror. And so, yeah, there are those really difficult calls, but you have no idea when they're going to come. And sometimes it's a little more mundane. Sometimes you're sitting with your patient on offload delay for hours on end. Sure, the lights and sirens can be exciting and fun when it works well. We can talk about that later. But it's... there's a lot more sitting than I realized that there would be when I was studying, because when you study, you go through all the worst case scenarios, of course, and then that is a relatively smaller percentage of the calls, but there's just so much more to the job than just the big calls, the go, go, go.
Yeah.
What were the other parts of the question?
Is there such a thing as a typical week for a paramedic, or is every day different? Does it fluctuate with the seasons?
Yeah, so depending on what service you work for, you might be go, go, go all day, every day, or you might be sitting at your base for a long time in some of the significantly more rural areas. It really depends. But I should also note that you mentioned in Eastern Canada or Eastern Ontario, and so there is no College of Paramedicine. And so what that means is that the skills are not transferable province to province, and so you need to write equivalency exams to be able to practice in other provinces. That leads to a whole slew of different complications, and I think that's a whole other debate in itself. But it's important to know that Ontario is very different than PEI is very different to BC, and even within Ontario there's significantly more urban areas and more rural areas, and while Ontario is huge, there's a big north up there that has a lot going on. So typical day and week, when you're going to get in to your base, if you're relieving another crew, often it's customary to get there a bit before. So if a shift, let's say, is 7 a.m. to p.m. or p.m. to a.m., then you often try to get there a bit before, like 6:30, to relieve the other crew, to find out about what's going on in the county, in anything to know about the base, whether there's some frequent flyer patients to know about, that kind of thing, to check off your truck. And then if there's a last minute call for them, maybe you're able to take it so they're not stuck on overtime for hours on end.
And if you go in half an hour early, is that paid time, or that's just sort of transfer time and not technically paid, but you're helping yourself during your shift by being there ahead of time and getting prepared and offloading whatever
so that's
the previous crew has been dealing with? And
that's a bit of a debate in different ways. Some places it might be kind of paid only if you get a call and relieve the other crew.
Okay.
Sometimes it's through the goodness of your heart that may or may not be reciprocated at the end of your shift.
Okay.
That's a bit of a political issue depending on the different services. But then that's the start of your day, and then you just go through your truck check off, checking whatever emails you might have. There might be a major event, so you're finding out what road closures there are in the area, and then you just kind of wait for that call to happen. There's some days where you have deep clean inventory, all of that stuff, but most of the time you start and, well, you might have a call right off the bat and you might sit there for 30 minutes.
Would you be doing inventory? Would that be a scheduled shift, or you're doing inventory while waiting for?
Oh no, that's all during your downtime, including continuing medical education and other various admin tasks.
So you're never just sitting doing nothing. You're probably, or there is a lot of proactive time, but sometimes some true downtime during a shift.
If you're
depending on
lucky, depending on the person, it highly depends on the call volume. So urban cities might be just constantly like, you get your patient offloaded, guess what? There's 7 calls waiting for you. That's maybe partly due to our medical system. I'm sure we can have a discussion about that. And just chronic understaffing. And so just pushing your medics constantly. And there was actually an interesting study that was released last year or a year before about utilization in paramedics in emergency services in Eastern Ontario. And it showed that over the last few years, utilization has gone up significantly. And so that leaves less time for those admin tasks, less time for that decompression, more burnout.
That's fair.
And so, you're kind of on the whims of the emergencies of the day. And when you get patients to hospital, maybe you'll be able to offload them. Maybe you'll be waiting with them for hours. It depends on the triage, the acuity of your patient, and how staffed and overburdened the hospital is that day.
I have a lot of questions, but sticking to the career path in Canada, are there different types of paramedics? Are there different levels of paramedics? I've heard, I'm from British Columbia, so I think I've heard of EMS and EMT. I didn't realize that it wasn't cross Canada, that certification. So what do you need currently to become a paramedic? In your experience, I guess, from Eastern Canada, but also maybe just Canada-wide, what is required? What does it look like? If say tomorrow I was like, I want to be a paramedic, what do I need to do to make that happen?
Yeah, so current process is it's a 2-year college diploma. It recommends having schooling or a degree beforehand, but it's not required as of right now, at least. They are considering making that, instead of a 2-year, a 3-year degree program. But there are some pushback to that because we're chronically understaffed. But so that gives you the primary care paramedic designation after you complete your provincial exam and go through those finalities, and then you're a primary care paramedic. Now then there's an optional 3rd year or a 1-year program in itself to become from a primary care to an advanced care paramedic. So that's going to give you more medication abilities, specific skills that aren't taught as a primary care paramedic, such as intubations, crikes, where you do the whole cutting thing that you see on TV. I don't actually know anyone who's done one yet. And a lot more cardiac meds, so for your heart. And although they definitely prefer if you've got a bit of experience as a primary care paramedic under your belt before doing the advanced care paramedic, there are a lot of people that just go straight to advanced care paramedic. We call that zero to hero. And there are benefits and negatives about that. And then you're an advanced care paramedic.
Okay. With a slightly higher wage?
In general, about 10% more than a primary care paramedic.
For that extra year of schooling?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, Michi. And so then there is a third level called critical care paramedic, but that is very much only reserved for select few places. I think Toronto has a few places, a few critical cares, and flight medics, like so the orange helicopters, where you have to get transfers by flight, or they come and land on the highway to extricate a difficult patient, and so they have access to significantly more options.
And that's yet another year of school?
I don't actually know the specifics on getting to critical care paramedic, but it does require several years as an advanced care paramedic before even considering that.
That makes sense. I know there are a lot of schools in Canada that offer the paramedic diploma, degree, certification.
So,
are they hard to get into?
Yeah, so when I went, caveat, things could be different 10 years later, but when I went in, it was a challenging program to get into, and definitely a very challenging 3 years. Or 2 years. To give an example, when I did human kinetics straight out of high school, it would go through the anatomy textbook in 3 semesters, 3 different classes. In paramedic school, that was 1 semester, the entire book. And so, like, it's very condensed. It's very focused, and so there is a lot of burnout in that program. I think in my class, with 60 started, we had low 40s graduate.
Okay. Is it really hands-on, or is it bookish? Like, does the program, at least where you studied, do you feel that you were prepared for your first day on the job?
So the 4 semesters start very bookish and then gradually get you into, well, labs from day 1, but and then get you into hospital settings, into ambulance settings, and then the full 4th semester is you're on the road with a emergency crew, learning hands-on direct from the job that you'd be doing, and that kind of gives you a bit more of that confidence and guidance from your role models and preceptors to know how to interview a patient, to know how to give a report to the hospital, to make sure that you know how to do your skills, that kind of thing. But in response to the number of schools, I don't know how many schools there are in Ontario, but I think I heard a statistic recently that's talked about how we have 600 graduates per year.
Okay. But the need is probably greater.
Yeah, we have, I think, about 1,200 openings per year, so we're going in the wrong direction.
That's intense. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you for that. All right, so I know that you've now enlightened us on the diploma program and some of the requirements and if it prepares you for the job. What about your career path? Did you have a typical career path going into this? What about your fellow colleagues on the job? Did they have typical careers, or did you all come from different angles and perspectives?
Yeah,
and
so
Andrew's Pat is with us too, so
she wants to be part of it
occasionally.
So the career path, I mean, we'll talk about the later part in a moment, but so some people, it is their second career. For me, it was my second career. I did professional athlete stuff beforehand and then switched into this. Excellent. Other people do high school and then a quick pre-med to make sure that they know what they're doing and then right into paramedic school. Yeah. Some people go straight from high school to paramedic school and they're like on the road at 19. I'm like, oh, wow. So
that's a hard, thinking about that, to be 19 years old and face some of the things that paramedics no doubt encounter.
Yeah, it takes a certain level of maturity, for sure. And so in terms of career path, I mean, once you're a paramedic, there isn't much progression or moving around. There may be options. Almost all of them require extra schooling.
That's what I was going to ask you. That was a later question. So I know when I look at different career options, I ask myself, what are opportunities for career advancement? To me, that's just something I value and that's important. So for this career, what does that look like? What does advancement within the medical service for paramedics look like?
Yeah, so within paramedics, within the services themselves, there's probably about a 10-to-1 ratio of paramedics to supervisors, and then a smaller ratio to management roles. So within the service, those really are your only options. Within outside your service, if you're in a big urban space, they might have other options such as tactical medics, who go into the scariest of situations and train for that. And then you could also go into various regulating bodies, so the Regional Paramedic Program of Eastern Ontario oversees paramedics, so that type of thing that is off the road. But in general, there aren't too many advancement opportunities, especially without further education. There's a lot of options out there if you maybe have the soft skills and hard skills from being a paramedic, and then you have a health sciences or any other degree and then move on from there.
Out of curiosity, would you say that's generally supported? So say you worked in Ontario and you had been a paramedic for 8 years and you wanted to advance, and sorry, that was random. Okay. And you wanted to advance and maybe get a higher salary, level up your skills. Can you usually do that with the support of your employer, or do you have to kind of quit and then start with a new organization? Just from what you've seen, not necessarily from...
Yeah, and I guess that's a good time to say that all of these experiences are my own anecdotal evidence, and that what I speak to may be representative of others and may not be. But there are people who jump up to supervisor pretty quick because that's something that they want to do, and sometimes there's a lack of supervisors and they need them. In general, if you're not going to have your employer support.
No? Really?
No.
Okay.
Like they're desperate for medics. They're going to say, we need you on the road. I've had many colleagues who they had to do schooling online on their downtime, and they asked for leave of absence from their work to do in-person studies, and they're told no. And so you are a number in a seat.
That's hard. So, okay, thinking about your career path then, was there anything unexpected or any other things that were unexpected when you started your employment as a paramedic?
So I got into it thinking that it would be a lot more physical. And there definitely are moments of requiring a lot of strength to get large people out from complicated places. Why does everyone fall behind their bed or behind the toilet? Or in basements around corners? Like, it's just a thing that happens. Anyway, so there are those moments of pretty intense strength needed, but there is effectively zero cardio, as an example. So there's a lot more sitting than I expected. A lot more sitting. So either sitting waiting for call, doing admin stuff, or sitting in the ambulance on the way to your call, or sitting on offload delay. And so it's important to think long-term health.
And what were you not surprised by? What met your expectations about this career?
We were told from day one that it was more of a paramilitary environment, and so the job has reflected that, in the sense of you kind of do as you're told, and so dispatch tells you to go somewhere, and you don't get the option to say no. You're going. But that's also what we sign up for.
Yeah, that's fair. So thinking about someone who's considering being a paramedic as a career, and knowing that that's what this video is essentially about, as well as some, getting a really good idea of what is involved with this job. But what are some things that someone who's considering this career should really, that they don't consider right off the bat, but should spend some time considering before applying to the program?
So you might think that, so first of all, Ontario medics are actually paid reasonably well, especially compared to the US counterparts, but mostly around the province, Eastern Ontario is actually paid relatively well compared to other medics. So back when I started, it's a 2-year diploma, and then you are basically in a job that gives you at the time about 80K salary, and now it's closer to 90, and you'll see that inflation number over 10 years has gone up 12%. So when I was recently researching alternative career options, they start at higher than we do, and they don't have to deal with trauma or night shifts or disrupting your circadian rhythm. So the pay certainly has not kept up, especially under certain governments that capped pay increases. That has been a consistent challenge. But it's not just about pay. There's so much more to the job that are both positive and negative. But if you want to talk about certain things that you really should consider before going in, consider that, it is an allure to do a quick, you're getting paid decently right off the bat. Well, decently is depending on your desires and abilities. But as a paramedic, only 1 in 20 paramedics actually make it to retirement. 19 out of 20 leave the profession beforehand. And 1 in 6 paramedics will develop PTSD. And that's 5 times higher than the regular population. And of course, there's the shift work that, you can get to days only at some point, depending on your seniority and your service. But the rotating shift work is known to be extremely detrimental to mental and physical health and leads to a 15-year shorter lifespan. For comparison, smoking is 10. So
that's pretty concerning.
Yeah, very.
Yeah, no, I've heard that, especially about shift work and REM sleep and its impact on women in particular. I know there's been studies, and I didn't even realize that it went beyond that. So then you start with a relatively good salary, probably right off the bat. What kind of person would be really good at this career, would excel at this career, and conversely, what kind of person would this career not be suitable for?
Yeah, so someone that would be good at the career would be someone who is very, very yes man, that will see this paramilitary profession and think, yep, I can be told what to do and no problem. To have kind of no autonomy in your decisions, to just ask and be told. And when a manager says jump, you say how high. That type of person, and maybe a little, because you need some level of empathy, but you also have to keep certain emotions away so that you don't get too invested in all of the patients, because that will more likely lead to challenges in the future. Speaking of which, if for someone who maybe shouldn't do this, if you get wrapped up constantly in empathizing with others, you're going to drive yourself crazy. If you have too much empathy, if you worry about being in a system that is resistant to change, remember it is government funded and government sometimes moves slowly. So if you are genuinely affected by inefficiencies and by things that are the way they are because they're the way they are, not because of an actual reason. And if you are empathetic towards a lot of suffering and you take that home with you, it may not be the right career for you.
That makes a lot of sense. That's similar to when I was speaking with someone who was trying to become a veterinarian, but she was so empathetic, and she was told by the schools that she should work in the SPCA for a year or 2 because animals are euthanized every day, and that degree of separation for someone who cares deeply can be really something that you need to consider before you choose this career. So those are some really good points. So Andrew, thinking about your career, was there anything once you started as a paramedic that you learned about yourself, maybe that you hadn't known about yourself before being a paramedic?
Um, yeah, so I mean, it's hard to figure out whether it was due to the job in itself or just different levels of maturity over time. Um, but one of the things that I learned is that I kind of put myself last a lot. And you might think that that's pretty good in a service or in a profession that aims to serve the public, to always put them first. But the thing with that is that then you're more prone to taking things home, to burnout, to you can't help anyone else once you're injured. And so it's important to find that right balance. And that's something that I started developing more at the end.
Good for you. That's a really good answer. So if I were to ask you, thinking about this career, what are your top 3 favorite things of being a paramedic? And conversely, what are maybe your 3 least favorite aspects of this career? And I know it's an opinion, and other paramedics might have different answers, or they might have similar answers. But what are the top 3 things, and what are the top not great things about being a paramedic?
So I guess the first kind of best thing would be that when you find, because like as a part-timer, you're bouncing around different partners, different bases for a while, and then as a full-timer, you kind of have a more regular partner. And so that bond that you develop with your partner is going to be arguably stronger than that with your life partner, because you're going to see each other through thick and thin, through the worst possible outcomes. And you're going to discover so much about each other and yourselves. And like that front of the ambulance is such a sacred space because there's an implicit understanding that you're not going to be repeating the things that you hear from your partner in the worst moments of their times as well. And so that intimacy, that bond is really powerful, and that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Okay, I have an unscripted question for you now.
Yeah.
You know how there's shows like Grey's Anatomy where there's, doctors and medical students, and it's all drama, and relationships and inappropriate things on the job. And I'm sure there's shows like that. I know there's shows like that for other services too, like paramedics and firefighters. Is there any degree of accuracy in those dramatic portrayals, or not really? Is it a very different bond?
Usually it's pretty, no, not everyone who goes into the ER is requiring surgery or needing immediate support. You're not going to have 5 doctors waiting for your ambulance to get there. It's more like your ambulance is going to get there, you're going to sit in line for 30 minutes before even telling them what's going on. So like,
even if it's a critical care patient?
Sometimes people have died on the stretcher waiting for help.
Just the way it is in certain parts of Canada and other parts of the world too.
Yeah, depending on the staffing levels and all of that. Anyway, so it's not like the fictional TV shows.
Okay.
A lot more mundane, but if they portrayed a normal day, it would just be really boring for TV, so people would turn off pretty quick.
Nobody wants to watch the half-hour stretcher breaks on TV. It doesn't sound like compelling drama. That's totally fair.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a couple more fun questions for you. I've known other people who work in healthcare, and they say that the full moon makes people a little bit more kooky and crazy. Is that remotely accurate? Would you agree? Or maybe let's start with that.
Sure.
Do people go nuts for the full moon?
For whatever reason, sometimes, that happens. I was talking about it to a coworker at some point, and they actually found some scientific reason, and I forget what it was. And so that would be really great to be able to tell right now. But for whatever reason, around full moons, there does seem to be an increase in weirdness. And maybe that's part of people thinking that it's weird and therefore self-fulfilling prophecy. But it's totally a thing.
Okay. What about holidays? Times of the year like Christmas or Thanksgiving, when people are together doing family things and maybe they're making some poor decisions with deep fryers or whatever. Do holidays get crazy in the ER and with paramedics and ambulance service?
There's definitely a difference in holiday stuff, as you may or may not be familiar with. When there's lots of family together, sometimes there can be extra stress, and so sometimes that leads to more stress-related things, heart attacks. Sometimes I've had patients who just need a damn break from their family, and so they either do something stupid or just say they have something just to get out of there. And then there's also the times when you might not see grandma very often, and so now that the family is all there, they recognize that, wow, how long have you had this symptom? And they're like, this isn't good. And so like there's a bit of that check-in as well of like just recognizing certain things that maybe have been missed for the last 3, 6, 12 months, and maybe being like, you should get that checked out. And then sometimes some overly worried family members who are like, oh, that can't be good. I'm like, well, it's kind of fine, but okay, we'll take them in. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, back to that question that we didn't quite answer. So Andrew, thinking about this job, what would you say are the top 3 best parts of this career, and also what are your least favorite parts of this career?
Yeah, so we talked a bit about the partner intimacy, not in a sexual way, but just like you're part of each other's intimate moments. And then, I mean, you got to go with lights and sirens. No, it's not everyone's thing, but honestly, driving lights and sirens, when it works out well, when people actually listen and pull over, it's like you're parting the seas and you're like, I'm gonna get to that critical patient, and it really is pretty cool.
That's awesome.
So that's the fun part, and then I guess as not really a work thing per se, but kind of the social benefits in the sense that people hear about, oh, you're a paramedic, that must be really interesting. And they're suddenly interested in talking. And as a more extrovert, mostly, or like pretty 50-50 introvert extrovert, but a bit more on the extrovert side, I think that's pretty cool because I get to talk about something that maybe not everyone gets to have the opportunity to learn about on a regular basis. And so kind of clear up some myths, misconceptions, and talk about some fun things too.
Okay. So those are lights and sirens, the relationship with your coworker,
and like social benefit. Type
and then
thing.
What are the 3 your 3 least favorite parts of the job?
So I guess the first main one would be the system is broken. It is so broken.
In Canada or
yeah,
maybe elsewhere? Hard to say.
Maybe elsewhere, I don't know specifically, but paramedics is a relatively new profession, especially compared to the other emergency services, fire and police.
Yeah.
But yeah, the system is pretty broken. We don't have the proper healthcare. It's been underfunded for decades. All sides of the aisle. There's no one political party to blame for sure. And it's the system. It's painful. You're like, you try to advocate for your patients, but there's just nowhere for them to go. And we focus so much on reactive medicine as a culture instead of preventative. And there's so many things that we could do if we just put our minds to it. So I guess that's the main one. Another really unpleasant part of the job is just the abuse that you get. And so from patients, sometimes from other people within your organization. But the patient, like, people know that customer service jobs suck because of the demanding patrons to whatever establishment that you're in. They're entitled, they are customer first mentality. That bleeds into healthcare as well. There's just this innate, you are beneath me, not for everyone, but for many patients. And like, you are here to serve me. And like, so just the amount of people that just treat you as a number rather than we're all people as well. So treat us with respect. We always have to treat you with respect, despite sometimes people don't want to, but like we will anyway. But it's tough sometimes. And then the last thing, maybe it's a bit of a repetition of a broken system, but we know the statistics. We've studied them. We know the challenges, and yet we're doing nothing about it. We're not funding properly. We're not educating properly. Various services provide lip service. Oh, we have peer support as long as it doesn't cost us anything. Like, there's no willingness to actually help the people stay in the profession longer. Like the average...
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like the average career expectancy for a paramedic in, I believe it's Canada, is 6.5 years. Wow. Like, that's how high our burnout rate is. If you look at different seniority lists around the country, or at least the province, you see that there's just not that many up top, and the vast majority have under 5 years of experience, because it's just soul crushing and draining, and there's no support, there's no acknowledgement, and it takes its toll.
That's fair. I know this is just a much more superficial question, but I know during the pandemic there was a lot of love for healthcare workers, and people would bring in chocolates and treats. Aside from the much bigger problems that you've talked about, do you ever get those little happy staff appreciation moments at work? Do people ever come back and say, you made a difference in my life?
Yeah, sometimes. So there are definitely patients or families of patients who send out thanks and acknowledgements, sometimes little treat baskets, and those are pretty nice. Sadly, those aren't always passed on to the medics that were there. So like there was a period of a few years where, at least in my service, there was thanks being sent to the management, and they just didn't pass them on. And so we're like,
horrible.
What's going on here? But in the vast majority of the time, due to PHIPA, Personal Health Information and Privacy Act, we don't get to find out what happened to the patients.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the places where it really needs improvement in the profession, because you bring these patients to the hospital, you have a working diagnosis, you treat it according to a certain thing, and then you just never find out about anything. And so it would be great to have that closure, to have even like a checkbox on the ambulance call report that says, I would like to follow up with this patient, or I would like, when they're okay with it, the patient to be able to say, do I consent to having the paramedic find out what my diagnosis was? Because it would help our learning as well, because if we're working under the assumption that this is a cardiac issue, and then it's just not, it's like, well, we could really learn from that, so that there's that feedback. But instead, it's just, as soon as they're in the hospital, out of our knowledge, out of our care.
I'm kind of sad to hear that, because I think part of me thought that you could inquire at the hospital and be like, this patient I brought in a couple of days ago, really want to know how that little girl at a collision scene is doing or something. And I know me, I'm a person who likes stories, and I appreciate knowing the end of a story. And I've, even when I've witnessed collisions in my life and being the first person on scene, and I really wanted to know what happened to the people involved. And it was difficult to find that information. But I totally get that, because I, as a person, need closure. And I guess I kind of assumed that paramedics could inquire, or at least be contacted at a later date by the family. But I suppose the family or kin or friends may never even know who the responder was.
I mean, there's no legal way. Sure, there are people who ask, and they may or may not get an answer because it's a breach of pre-HIPAA to give an answer. Okay. Sometimes I'm lucky enough to see the patient again in hospital doing well. And like that's really nice for me.
Are you allowed to connect with them and be like, hey?
I mean, depends on the circumstances, but often like for example, bring a patient in the morning in really not a good state, and then they're still there 6 hours later when you're back at that hospital, and you're like, oh, hey, how's it going? And then like they're like, oh yeah, thanks so much for bringing me in. That's a pretty special moment.
That's
But then, if you like stories, I mean, so early in the pandemic, when we really didn't know the symptoms fully, we were told fever is bad. We went to this patient who he didn't know he had a fever. He just had lack of appetite for like 8 days, and this is before any of the abdominal symptoms were known. And we went there. Our supervisor was there first because they were closer, and they took, as our protocol was, take a temperature. Oh, fever. Okay, so we gown up. And then we gowned up and brought him to the hospital. It didn't feel like an emergency, but I mean, obviously it is, but like not a dire emergency. And so then we brought him to the hospital, and it turned out he had COVID. And then he was in the ICU on a vent for a while, and then eventually he made it out, and that made the news because he was someone in the community, and it was a success story.
That's good. Is it?
Yeah.
No. Is it bad?
No, it was good. He survived.
But it was yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes I get emotional at success stories as well, because they're pretty few and far between.
I'm glad you had that opportunity though, and that there was follow up and closure too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty special moment.
All right, so returning. So you've got a few years of experience as a paramedic. You've seen a lot of life and death. Would you have, not even thinking about the career, but you must have a piece of advice for the general population for life and death? Like,
sure.
Do you have a good piece of advice that people should, that you've seen maybe people not following, but maybe they should? I don't know. Do you have any recommendations or advice for us watching the show today about life from your perspective as a paramedic?
So we'll give a two-parter. One, or three-part, sure.
Okay.
First, kind of the more obvious one, cherish your moments. You don't really know when they're going to end. And if not end, when things are going to start to go downhill, because they do for everyone eventually. And so cherish that time with your family, your loved ones, because it's special. Next part is stop doing stupid things. I have a really bad relationship with snowmobiles, ATVs, motorcycles, because of the dangers and the things that I see. So be safe. I know that those are fun things to do. Try to do them safely. And I had another one, but that's okay.
I think those are two really good pieces of advice, so thank you. I hope we can think about those and maybe heed them. So I like that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so thinking about your career, was there a time when you really felt that you were making a difference, that you felt really happy and satisfied as a person in your heart? You were making a difference?
I mean, yes, but...
I hope there's 25 such
moments,
but...
Yes, but in hindsight, I'm thinking I wish I could have made the difference in more people, not like a one-on-one basis, but like as helping educate or policy or something to be able to affect more lives in meaningful ways. But I guess one of the times that I just really felt like I made a difference was recognizing something that happened, and I don't know, there was that like part the seas moment with the ambulance and the multiple car police escort, and it was like, it's kind of cool. I'm making a difference. Getting to that person in the hospital safely. And I guess in another sense, just connecting with certain patients and giving them sometimes some new perspective. In this case, I'm referring more to mental health situations. Letting them know that they're not alone. There's so many stigmas in our life about this and that, and males are supposed to keep all their emotions in, and like, no, we have them too. Let them be shown. Let yourself matter. So
yeah. I like that. So I know we dived already a little bit into the length of a paramedic's career, where you said the average for Canada, or maybe you for other around the world, is about 6.5 years. But is this career sustainable from a mental health perspective? Can it happen? Can you have a long career? Are the people who are the veterans, are they doing okay?
I mean, referring to different coworkers of mine, there are several that have just clear signs of burnout, and they know it, but they're just lasting until the end. And then there's a lot of people who recognize that and take that 4 months, 2 years off on short-term, long-term disability prior to retiring. How many people retired in the 9 years that I was there with sound mental health? I can count on one hand. It isn't sustainable, but it can be if we care. Like chronic understaffing, I don't know if you know, but it's 42 hours a week is the standard because it's 24/7 basis, and so divide by 4, 42 hours.
So shift is 10 hours?
12 hours.
12
So,
wow, that's long.
Yeah, so 12 hours and then day shift, night shift to get to 24/7. Yeah,
you have to do
rotations.
similar to a nurse, right? You do days for a bit and then evenings and then
Depending on the
nights.
person. So as a full-timer, you have a schedule, a set schedule. Depending on where you work, you might do 2 days, 2 nights, 4 off. You might do 2 on, 2 off, 3 on, 2 off, flip days, flip nights every 2 weeks.
That's brutal.
It's brutal. And then if you're lucky enough, eventually maybe you'll do days only. So you're still the 2 on, 2 off, etc. But you're doing a rotation that way. But evenings, nights, weekends, holidays, it's all part of that. But then so many services have, you have to build up your seniority as a part-timer or casual before getting to full-time. And the way to do that is you take any shift that's available. And so you might be in a situation where you do a like a Monday 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. shift, followed by a Tuesday 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. shift, followed by a Wednesday 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, followed by a Friday 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. It's just like the night sandwiches, the minimal time between shifts. Like it's what you have to do to get the seniority, but it's so brutal.
By a night sandwich, is that when you, what's that?
Oh, it's when you go from like a day shift to a night shift to a day shift in the minimal amount of time possible.
Oh, okay, that sucks. Okay, so let's talk about, just dive for a second back into the pandemic. You worked through the pandemic in Eastern Canada. What stands out to you about that time?
Well, the government gave us our 4 months of hero pay, so that was cool. I was off for most of it, so I didn't even get it. But yeah, it was just a time of uncertainty, and you were gowning up in basically garbage bags in 40-degree heat doing CPR, and you're like, this is more dangerous to me because I might pass out from dehydration. Like, you would get to the hospital and you'd take off your gown and it would just be soaking and wet. And you'd be like, I need some time to like rehydrate, to have a Gatorade or 6, and to like regenerate a little. And dispatchers, supervisors, staff would be like, no, you gotta get out of there. And so it's like, those wearing garbage bags in 40-degree heat, no thank you. And that's throughout the first summer.
That's what you had to wear in addition to your uniform. You had to always wear a kind of a hazmat suit, garbage bag.
Yeah,
on
and
top
so
of it?
yeah.
Even for a drive, or just the minute you
When
encountered a
dealing
patient?
with patients.
Okay.
So there's a lot of uncertainty because we're not vaccinated against this yet, and I had a coworker that young, healthy guy was on the vent. He made it, but like that moment was a realization that this thing was deadly, even to young, healthy people. So it was tough.
Are people, I know that in Canada there's the suggestion that people are leaving the healthcare field in droves. Is that true to the best of your experience within this field,
Yeah.
or even the rest of the healthcare field in Canada?
Well, I'm
Or
leaving.
in Ontario, Eastern Canada?
Well, I'm leaving.
Leaving.
So there was a recent survey in Ottawa area that surveyed Ottawa healthcare workers, and the numbers were alarming. So I think it was 64% of Ottawa area healthcare workers, not just paramedics or hospital staff, all healthcare workers dread going to work. Like, that was the word they used, dread. And 49%, so almost a majority, were actively looking for new careers in the next year. So I'm like, if you've got half your staff who are actively looking to get out, that's not sustainable and extremely alarming.
That's pretty concerning for sure.
So yes, people are either leaving or attempting to leave in drove. I say attempting because sometimes you've got like the silver handcuffs, you're stuck in the job because you've got this diploma which is effectively useless for anything else. And so you've got a somewhat decent salary, you want to leave, but to leave you need to educate more on your time off, and so you need to do online school, and that's in addition to all of your other responsibilities. So
And your 12-hour shifts.
yeah, it's really hard to have people leave the profession
Yeah.
at the same time as them wanting to, and that leads to some toxic work environments as well, where people are just burnt out, but they have to keep going.
Yeah. How do you feel about being called a hero?
Actions speak louder than words. So you can call someone a hero all you want, but if you continue to maintain the status quo, you're useless.
Okay.
So like you look like you want an expansion on that. So like if the political powers and the people who have the power to make a change say we recognize our heroes and we care about mental health, and then there's no follow-up in that, in conditions of work, in ability to help your employees, you're paying lip service. Resign, go to a different career. So let someone else actually help.
Okay, that's fair. All right. Okay, so diving back into that brutal sounding shift work, and I know I've had a partner before in the healthcare field, and I found it so hard with the erratic shifts, being called all the time out for, on holidays, etc., and the inconsistent work hours. I found that hard as a spouse. Tell me about, from your experience, paramedics and family life. Is it awful? Do you really need a partner? Like, let's say you have a relationship or children at home, one or the other or both. I guess you'd have both with the latter. But do you really need, let's say you've got 2 kids and they're school age, do you really need the other partner to have a 9-to-5 job for you to be successful, to work as a paramedic and have a family? How does it work? Or maybe there's families with double healthcare workers, and I know they exist, but how does that work?
It takes a special person, special connection, special relationship. I personally don't have kids, so I can't speak too much to this. But a lot of the times when I was working, I was wondering, how do parents do this? They must have incredible time management and respect and relationship, and they must do things really right. And I know double paramedic parents that somehow juggle that. I don't know if they have extra support from family, or if they have really good daycare or nanny. I can't speak to that. I do also know of people who just work as a paramedic and then other jobs to get the income so that the partner can stay at home with the kids and support them that way. So I can't speak to everything, but it is possible. I know a lot of coworkers who do it. Kudos to you. I don't know how.
Yeah, I can imagine that's awful. So hard, but you make it work, as any parent does, or as any person in a relationship. They do their best to hang on to that relationship and make it work. Are there any good job perks, at least, though, that might make up for the challenges like that?
Certain places give you like half off at Burger King, or well, okay, not all of them, but like little discounts of on the road food because you're
That's
eating out a lot of the
nice.
time because you don't have time to get proper cooking, so a lot
Go
of fast
Burger
food.
King. That is nice though.
Well, not all Burger Kings,
Okay,
and
fair. All right.
depends on the manager.
Yeah.
But like
for if you're on shift.
little different
That's nice.
perks here and there, little emergency services appreciation days at like Canadian Tire and stuff. That's kind of cool.
Totally. Absolutely. That's good. I'm happy to hear that. All right, we're getting close to the end. What pops into your mind if I were to say what was your most memorable call out, whether it's good or bad?
Yeah, I'll spare you the details, but one that just always sticks in my mind with that type of question, even if she worded it well. P.S. Please never ask an emergency services person, what is your worst call? So memorable was a good touch.
That's
but,
a good point.
Yeah, I'll spare you the details of the call that involved someone who sat down to dinner with their family and then wasn't alive at the end of dinner. So that's one that kind of sticks out in my head.
Sorry you went through that. Okay. All right. So moving on close to the end, you've been a paramedic for 8.5 years in Eastern Canada. And we've talked about a lot of things today, and I really appreciate your honesty, candor, and insight. Would you recommend a career as a paramedic?
If you haven't gotten it by now, I'm sorry. No, I don't. It needs desperate shifts. If you do, treat it as a temporary, document everything so like you take 10, 15 minutes for truck check at the start of the day. You take 20, 30 minutes of paperwork after every call or more. If you need police reports, CS reports, ambulance call reports, incident reports, etc., etc. There can be a lot of paperwork. Take 5 minutes at the end of your shift to document some of the challenges that you faced so that if ever you need to refer back to these, of course, leaving HIPAA out of it, but like if you ever need to refer to these, that there's evidence, because as the saying goes, not documented, not done. And so document everything personally to your personal email, not the work email. And
is that legal?
Oh, no, like don't document patient information.
Okay.
Document like, I dealt with this shitty situation.
Okay.
And continue your schooling even as a paramedic, because it's a lot easier to finish your degree before you burn out. It's mostly a when, not an if, for almost everyone. And so finish that schooling so that you have a plan B, because you're going to need it sooner than you realize. And to the powers that be that can change things, if half your staff are actively looking for new careers, and if a third of your staff are off on long-term disability, I don't know, consider changing some things to keep your workers a little happier a little longer.
Are a third of paramedics in Canada off on long-term
I don't know about in
disability?
Canada, but in more than one service that I know, it's a quarter to a third of your staff are off.
Wow. And remind me what PHIPAA is?
Personal Health Information Privacy Act.
Okay, gotcha.
So basically don't give patient details to anyone outside the immediate care of the healthcare circle.
Yeah. But for maybe a select few who have the right personality and the right stamina as an emotional survivor, maybe it's a good career, but otherwise it sounds like it's a really tough, brutal, hard, short-term career, at least for paramedics
my
in Canada.
experience, mileage may vary. My experience might be a bit more anecdotal, but do your own research and look at the actual stats, not what management says. If your management has to say on day one of an orientation, you may hear that there's been a morale problem at work, I assure you that's not the case. Really, if you have to say it on day one, it's an issue.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that brings us to the end of our interview today. Andrew, I understand that you're leaving the field of being a paramedic, so thank you for your 8.5 years of service. I know it's not necessarily for me as a person to thank you, but I think just on behalf of Canadians, I would say thank you for dedicating this much of your life to being a paramedic in the healthcare field. I know it's really important, and I'm sure that whether you know it or not, you've made an impact. You've impacted many lives. So thank you for that. And thank you for your honesty and your candor today. And I hope that your interview has probably shed some light on people who are thinking about being a paramedic, whether they want to be a paramedic in Canada or whatever country you're watching today's video from. So I hope that Andrew's insights have helped you with that decision, or at the very least helped you think about some of the things that you might want to consider before entering this field. So Andrew, I wish you the very best in your future career, life, and everything. And thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences with our viewers today. So this is Isabella signing off with Andrew joining us from Eastern Ontario today, and we hope you have a wonderful day, and thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's video, I encourage you to comment. I think it's always great to start a discussion, some healthy discussion. I think Andrew has raised some great points, so there may be some things you want to talk about even with your local MLA or member of parliament, or just with your friends and colleagues. It's always great to have a conversation. So I encourage you to comment below if you're interested, subscribe to the channel. We do lots of great interviews with different career paths. So I'll post the link to the next one as soon as that's ready. And thanks again, Andrew, and have a wonderful day, everybody.